Douglas Murray was invited onto Piers Morgan to tell those forever demanding reparations for slavery and other events from centuries past exactly what he thought of their requests. He responds to her claims, and as you'll hear, and as usual, his opponent tries to twist his words. His opponent was this woman, and as you'll hear, says we need to apologise and acknowledge the hurt caused by slavery. It's insane to listen to the way she's talking. You'd think she was a slave herself, put to work in the cotton fields under fear of the whip. It's madness. What she forgets to mention is she is not a victim, but in fact a privileged woman living in a Western country. The life you lead and where you lead it determines your privilege, not your skin colour. Compared to much of the rest of the world, those of us living in first world countries are definitely privileged, whatever our skin colour, despite everyone seemingly trying to compete to be the most oppressed. And as Douglas points out, if Britain and America are such racist hellos, why are they the places where everyone wants to move to for a better life? Why don't they want to move to China, for example? Why is it, I wonder, they are forever banging on about our past, yet have no interest in mentioning the millions of slaves around the world as we speak, or other horrific slave trading empires throughout history, like the Arabic slave trade, which castrated all the men, and that is why there are no black people today in these Middle Eastern countries. And they certainly did not have one of the bloodiest civil wars in history to end slavery like America did. Have they asked them for reparations? Thought not. The reason for that is many of them don't actually give a damn about slavery or slaves or anyone else for that matter. They just hate Britain and America because their ideology tells them that is what they should believe. And this is just another way of attacking our nations, eroding national pride with the intention of demoralising us into extinction. Douglas, of course, is having none of it from this woman. Take a listen.
Well, it's a kind of grievance competition. Your guest earlier just tried to engage in it. I don't know what hurt she believes she's had from slavery. All of this was addressed 2 centuries ago. Everything has consequences. All history has consequences and ramifications. But, you know, if we were to play this fairly, we would at least look at all of the countries around the world that engaged in the slave trade who are simply not interested in any form of reparations. The Ottoman Empire, all the Arab countries who not just traded far more slaves than across the Atlantic, but castrated all the men so that there wouldn't be any more African slaves after them. They worked them to the bone. I see no interest across Africa in paying reparations for selling their brother and sister Africans into slavery or for working them to the bone to the present day. There is slavery across Africa today. In fact, there are more slaves in the world today than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So some of us are simply a bit bored of hearing people ripping at closed wounds and then crying about their hurt or their presumed hurt, because everybody could do this. 1 million Europeans were stolen by North Africans over the course of decades of the North African Barbary pirate slave trade. Where would you end if you did that? The answer is you couldn't end, because nobody is alive who has actually suffered the hurt, and nobody is alive who did the wrong. And I'd make one other point, if I may. It's always the countries that people want to come to who are put through this struggle session. Britain, like America and France, are the most desired destinations for migrants worldwide and have been for centuries. Why is that? It's not because we're racist, it's because we're better. It's because we're good. It's because when we see racism, we actually call it out and recognize it as a sin. Try finding that across Africa. Try finding that across the Middle East or in China. Nobody would hear. So what we have is a situation where the more virtuous countries are presented as the worst countries. It's sick, and most of us are tired of it.
Thank you, Douglas.
I am so sorry that Douglas is bored by the pain that has come from
That's not what he said.
Through slavery.
He didn't say. He didn't say. But what you're doing there, what you're doing, yeah. But hang on, Paula. Paula, you're being very disingenuous. That's not what he said.
I am.
The viewers aren't stupid. They know exactly what he said. He's not saying he's bored by the pain. He's saying, and I think it's a perfectly valid point, the pain that people who are alive today are claiming they're suffering for what happened 200 or 300 years is not a real pain. They're not the ones who suffered what was going on 200 or 300 years ago.
So, in terms of justice for all, I mean, I think we'd all agree that there should be justice.
Well, I'm not suffering from when the Normans invaded this country.
Agree.
I'm not suffering from what my ancestors went through.
I noticed that I've not been allowed to respond.
Or from the Romans. In other words, where do you take this? I mean, should I now be feeling pain from what the Romans did to this country?
In terms of slavery, I can take it to 2015, when the slave owners were compensated by the government. So I can take it to that extent.
But where does your personal pain come?
And I can say to you that I don't think that apologising is a bad thing. I think that apologising for a wrong is a good thing. I think that the Dutch royal family have done a fantastic thing in acknowledging what has gone wrong.
OK, I hear you, but